So culture, Joe, what does culture mean when we're talking about the workplace to you? Why is it critical, especially in a creative agency environment like Hope and Glory?
A very good question, Doug. And I think, let's be clear, there have been reams of books, right, and academic studies on culture and organizational culture. But from a personal perspective, the reason it's important is that it's the way to get basically to make sure people do their best work. And in my view, there are two elements to it. One is about an environment, the environment you create, an environment where people feel safe, they feel they're able to speak up without being criticized, they feel like they can absolutely bring everything into work and do their best work. But it's also about the experience and how you make people feel. I know that there's a wonderful quote, isn't there, by Maya Angelou, which is that people won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you make them feel. And for me, that is a really big part of culture.
Joe, a lot of people think that there's a trade-off between having a sort of warm and inclusive environment when everyone's really happy and skipping to work, or the equivalent in remote work, skipping to their desk, downstairs. And and then there's a trade-off between, really sort of cracking the whip, getting the work done, making sure the milestones are hit and deadline driven, which, is so intrinsic to PR. Do you think there is a trade-off? And if there is a trade-off, how have you navigated it?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I think there's this view, isn't there, that if you do really great work, you must be really tough on your people. And if you're great on your people, somehow the work's a bit soft. It's not really very, creative. It's not very meaningful. And I just don't think that's true. I think you can do both. And I think at Hope and Glory, we work very hard at looking at how can we be a very high challenge but high support environment. When I think about it and I drill it down, I talk about be tough on the task but kind on the person. Like you can be absolutely laser focused on the quality of the work, the idea, how it's implemented, the activation, but you can do that by showing up in a really kind, supportive, wonderful way. Like you don't have to be an idiot, right? In terms of how you deal with people. And I was reflecting on it the other day, and so many people in this industry I speak to have stories, war stories of having things thrown at them, shouted at, belittled, bullied. I mean, it's incredible. And quite frankly, there shouldn't be that behavior, right, in any business, let alone a creative business. But it sometimes feels that it comes with the territory. But I think you can be high challenge, push people to come up with brilliant ideas, but also wrap around a supportive culture at the same time.
So I grew up playing in a lot of bands when I was younger. And that so the whole creative process thing, when we called it jamming, when we were practicing, allow the creative process to flow, and then when it's showtime, that's when you hit it. But the reality of the workplace, I always tried to bring that in as a leader. But the reality of the workplace is different people are at different stages in their lives. Some are just coming out of post secondary. Some haven't even been to post secondary and they're well into their 40s and 50s and they've got families. And others are winding maybe toward the end of their careers or feeling kind of like it. And they don't want to be the old person in the corner with their head down or stuck at a computer. They're all going to have different ideas. How do you juggle all of them?
But isn't that the power of it? Isn't that the
That's the
beauty
that's the
of
nux, yeah.
yeah, working in particularly in our industry, and we know that the more diverse group of people that we have, the better the ideas, the better the work. So I think that's wonderful. I mean, that's absolutely how it should be. I often think of culture as, in some ways, you built a house, right? You're the architect. You've created a structure, but all the rooms are going to be different, and they're going to be furnished differently, and they're going to be people are going to be bringing different things. They might have a scatter cushion, who knows, a throw, a rug, but they're gonna occupy that in a way that works for them. And I think the best cultures are respectful of that. That you've created enough rituals, rules, ways that I guess structure that people feel safe in, but there is enough room for individual expression within that too.
Can I add on to that though? But when I interview, I conduct a fit interview. So I'm not looking for them to have different ideas. I'm looking to make sure they fit what we think we've already built.
Well, no, I think that's moved on. I think, Doug, you're going to have to change your frames of reference, right?
Okay.
I think it's about, it's not so much about fit, it's about adding. What will they add to your culture? Not will they fit with the existing culture? What's the additive piece? And of course, you want to make sure that people get on and there are some shared values and a shared belief system, but you're looking for the culture add, not the culture fit.
Now, Joe, when I started out in PR, my daughter was a year old. And when I look back at my career and I think about the sort of the milestones in my life, sort of getting married, having a child, the sort of milestones that she, went through. And and then now in my late 40s, so you've got perimenopause. And, it's sort of one size doesn't fit all. Like I had different needs at different stages in my life with respect to career. And I wanted to ask, you're very well known, Joe, in the industry for having an enormous reservoir of empathy. But how do you translate that empathy into actual policies that fit the different life stages of your team, which is sort of almost 100?
Yeah, you're right. It's great when you're managing. People say to me, "Oh, wow, you've got 100 people. That how exciting!" I say, "No, no, that's 100 complicated individual lives. Everybody who shows up is unique. They're different, and at any given one, any time, there's something going on." I was reflecting on the other day. I think in one day, we had a bereavement. Sadly, we had a cancer diagnosis. We also had a birth. And we had other joyful occasions as well. But you're having to pivot the whole time as a leader of a business. And I think what you have to do is create policies that at that point where people are going to feel overwhelmed or um, facing difficult circumstances, that there is something already written, already kind of down on paper as to how this is going to go. And I think that gives people a tremendous confidence if they know you've already thought that through. So when we started Hope and Glory 12 years ago, I actually wrote the handbook. I wrote the company handbook in week 2. There were 2 of us. There were just 2 of us. But I thought we need to have a roadmap as to what we're going to do at when everything happens. And at the time, there were only when we were small, and there were 10 of us. Perhaps James and I were the only parents. Now 20% of the team are parents, and we've had to evolve our policies as we've grown. And actually, you do flex to what's happening in people's lives. So we have a miscarriage policy because sadly that's been experienced by our team. We have a grief policy. We have a menopause policy because that's also been experienced by our team. So you start to add to your policies, but you are, I think, reflecting what's happening in people's life stages as you go and listening and responding in the best way that you can.
So policies always feel to me like a little bit of top down, but I know you can't get there without bottom up. Tell me about some of the bottom up process, and bottom such a terrible word, right? But the interweaving of communication and how important it is to listen to those 100 people.
100%. And then people always say, don't you have 2 ears and 1 mouth? And there's a reason for that. And we do listen a lot. We have team impact groups within the agency, which will represent different interest groups. And one of those actually is a parenting group. And they are very vocal, which is great at telling us what we're getting right and what we're getting wrong. We realized for a long time that we were kind of market leading, I think, in the types of policy we had around parental leave, but perhaps weren't quite getting it right when it came to returners. So people would go on their maternity or their paternity leaves, but we perhaps weren't giving enough thought to when they came back into the business. Were we giving them enough time? Were we supporting them through that? So now we do coaching. We do returner coaching. So everybody coming back has 3 coaching sessions. That wouldn't have happened unless our mums and dads had said to me, this bit's good at what we do, but actually we could do this bit better. So it's two-way. It's a two-way dialogue the whole time.
Do you get feedback sometimes that you can't? Sometimes, no, we're not going there. Like, and how do you know?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I think we always try and be as open-minded as we can, and if we can find a fix for something, we will. But you're right, not everything will work. And we often talk about the unintended consequences of action or a policy. So we'll look at it in the round and we go, look, if we did this, what would be the unintended consequences? because sometimes that might have a consequence for somebody else in the organization who may feel they're not being treated in the same way. So you're trying to create a series of things that feel inclusive, but also are fair, and that people feel they're being treated fairly, whether they have children or if they don't have children, whether they have a dog or they don't have a dog. All of those things are up for discussion, I think.
I wanted to ask, just touch upon diversity. I wanted your thoughts on what's happening, across the pond, in terms of dismantling of DEI frameworks. Do you think that's going to also take place around the world, in the UK, in other markets as well?
It's a very good point, Zana, and I think the answer to that is we hope not. But lots of American brands obviously operate out of the UK. I don't know how long it will take for some of the sentiment that's happening in the US to potentially come and hit UK shores. I feel at the moment the industry is being very protective of the D&I frameworks that are in place, and I think are doubling down, if anything else, on those. I certainly feel there are more discussions, more community groups, more coming together and having those discussions. So I think we are knowing it might come and almost gearing ourselves up to have a bit of a fight if it does come.
Yeah, I agree, because I sort of feel as if, I think our industry in particular, we understand the importance of diversity because we're creating messages for a diverse audience. And so naturally we understand, and diversity is wider than just gender and ethnicity. It's also socioeconomic. It's it's sort of neurodivergence as well. So I think it's a really interesting time for our industry because I see us being at the forefront of really trying to resist those changes because it will have such a negative impact to our industry.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
I play devil's advocate to that. Sorry. I mean, I get the whole idea of establishing a single culture at work, but at the same time, what we're talking about here is society's demand that I hire people of different cultures. If I don't, I get accused of being prejudiced, right? How am I supposed to establish a workplace culture when by process, by societal demand, I'm supposed to hire people from different cultures?
But Doug, I don't think culture is monolithic. I don't think there is one culture. And I guess going back to my analogy of the house and the structure, that can be one thing, but the people who occupy it can be quite different. And I think there is room for both. There is absolutely room for both. When I think of culture, I think of the rules, the rituals, the intentional actions that bring people together, the belief system, like the connective tissue almost that brings things together. But that actually, wouldn't it be boring if we were all the same? And actually, in any company, you want to have different ages, different gender, different ethnicities, and that's what makes our industry so rich, I think, and the idea is so valuable.
Kind of like a family, right? You use the house metaphor, and that leads me to family.
Yeah,
None
100%.
of the five in our house are exactly the same. We had someone stop by the door asking which way we're going to vote in local elections. I say, well, there's five voters in the house. Pretty sure three of them are going this way. One of them's definitely going that way. And the other one, I can't figure them out.
Yeah, I think a good culture should be loose enough that it gives an surety, confidence, safety for people, it also allows you to have your own view and to be able to challenge and to operate within that.
So the culture is we
That's
can
my
talk
view.
about it around the dinner table.
Yeah, completely. And that you're not worried about being there's no fear, right? There's no fear of bringing up your political views at the dinner table because you may not be agreed with by the person on the opposite side, but you will be listened to and your views will be held respectfully and there is space for them. I think that's the key thing. I think a culture is about creating space.
I love that. Joe, you're president of Women in PR. Can you share with our audience what Women in PR is and why you decided to step up and be president? And also, during your journey, what have you learned about women in the PR industry and specifically why so few of them make it to senior roles?
That's a very good question, Farzana. I think we've had, well, Women in PR is a UK organisation that's been going for 6 decades. It started long before me, believe it or not, and probably started at a time when there weren't that many women in the comms industry. Now we know that's changed. We know now that nearly 70% of women in the UK in comms, yeah, they are women in comms. What I think is really fascinating is that only a third of men have a comms role. Oh, sorry, a third of the industry are men. But actually, when you look at the stats, over 50% are in senior roles. So something has gone awry in all of that. And there are, we've been talking about these missing women who somehow they start their career and they never quite follow through because they leave. And they leave for a whole host of different reasons. And they're blocked. Or there are barriers that they decide that they don't particularly want to overcome, or they're actually very resourceful and think, actually, this isn't for me. I'm going to do it on my own terms, and I'm going to maybe do something else instead. So the organisation is really there to increase the diversity and numbers of women in leadership positions. That's the reason for being. That's the whole mantra. That's why we get out of bed in the morning, and it's very fulfilling. And what I think I've learned, to your question about what have I learned, is that every woman's experience is really different. Like, we are all very unique, and there isn't a one size fits all. And as an organisation, we need to hear those voices, and we need to bring those into how we evolve the industry, so that it actually is fairer. Because the whole intersectionality piece isn't talked about enough, I don't think. We talk about one gender and another gender. We don't talk about what's it like to be a black woman working in PR, or what's it like to be a queer woman working in PR. All of those things we should be talking about more.
So I wanted to ask, what advice do you have for women who want to step into senior roles, as well as advice for men who want to support women in the workplace to enter into those senior roles?
Where do you start, right? I wish I had a silver bullet for that one.
You are, incredible. You're such an inspiration to so many of us, Jo. So, start with what you've learned along the way.
What have I learned? I think the best advice I got given a long time ago was 80% is good enough. I think this industry attracts a lot of perfectionists, people who are high achievers. They absolutely want to do the best all of the time. And I remember being told probably about 20 years ago, Jo, just 80% is good enough. Maybe your house won't be perfectly tidy at the end of the day. Maybe you're going to miss a particular networking event, but it doesn't matter. Just do the best you can do at the time, and that will be, don't strive for perfection, because you'll never get there. So I think that was a really good piece of advice. The other piece, that when my children were small, was be in the moment. So fine to be busy at work, but actually the moment, whenever I would come home, I would turn my phone off. For the time that I had to do bedtime, bath time, I was absolutely with them. And yeah, later on in the evening when they were in bed, I probably did log back on, and I probably did work again. I probably had another shift, but I just felt like I wasn't having my attention pulled in two different directions. I was either all in with work, or I was all in with my family when they needed me, and I tried not to have a foot in both camps.
Really, really good advice for us all. Thank you so much, Jo.
Thanks, Joel.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to come on and talk to you both.